Our guest today is Dr. Jennifer Berry. She doesn't just talk about STEM, she redefines how students see themselves in it. As a leading voice in inclusive STEM education, Dr. Berry champions a powerful idea. STEM identity is not something students are born with, it's something they build. As the CEO of SmartLab, she is dedicated to bridging the gap between today's classrooms and tomorrow's workforce. Get ready for a great episode.
I'm educational justice coach Lindsay Lyons, and here on the Time for Teachership podcast, we learn how to inspire educational innovation for racial and gender justice, design curricula grounded in student voice, and build capacity for shared leadership. I'm a former teacher leader turned instructional coach. I'm striving to live a life full of learning, running, baking, traveling, and parenting because we can be rockstar educators and be full human beings. If you're a principal, assistant superintendent, curriculum director, instructional coach, or teacher who enjoys nerding out about co-created curriculum with students, I made this show for you. Here we go. Dr. Jennifer Berry, welcome to the Time for Teachership podcast.
Thank you for having me, Lindsay. I'm so happy to be here.
I am so excited that you're here because, as we were saying right before we hit record, I'm really interested in this idea of like class culture and how we kind of build up a culture of appropriate challenge and all of that. And I think your work is so helpful in how we can like make that actionable, particularly for STEM classrooms. But I think honestly for every classroom, it's so valuable no matter what you teach. Yeah. And so that's what's on my heart and mind this morning. And so I'm curious to know what is important for listeners to know that maybe you're thinking about today or that you want people to kind of keep in mind throughout.
Yeah, I loved how you mentioned what's so key for students, whether they're in a STEM classroom or whether they're in any kind of learning environment. But I also would translate that and transfer that even into a career focus, right? Because as we're educating youth and as we're educating students in the classroom, we should always be thinking about what is their future, right? Like obviously we want kids to be whole and best versions of themselves and have, the mental health capacity to survive in this kind of ever-changing, in some cases scary world. However, we should also be as educators thinking about how are we setting them up for success for future careers, to be and be in and thriving in future industries, some that already exist and some that are yet to be existing in existence because they're being developed as we speak, right? And so I always like to say to myself and to others and to my team who's developing our curriculum at SmartLab, what do we think about as to what skills do students need in order to thrive in a career and be not only the best versions of themselves, but the top of their game and lead in whatever they choose to focus on in life. So it isn't just, okay, when they're in the STEM classroom or when they're in the learning environment, but how does that connection connect to the broader life that they're going to have, right? And their experiences that they're going to bring to this world and how they're going to contribute to this world in meaningful and positive ways. So, we have coined this sort of STEM identity definition, which, STEM identity has been studied for years, right? And I know that the word identity can be very controversial, but the reality is when you put the word STEM in front of it, it really kind of loses that sort of polarizing perspective because it's really about thinking, how do you think? Not can you use a STEM application, but how do you think, right? And so we've defined STEM identity as a learner's self-belief that I belong, I can master rigorous challenges, and my ideas make an impact or have an impact, right? That cuts across any industry, right? I'm a CEO of a STEM company, but I don't consider myself a scientist, right? I don't consider myself, although I love math, I don't consider myself a mathematician or in that field, right? I consider myself a leader. I consider myself a visionary. I consider myself somebody that really galvanizes an idea or people and move us forward so that we can be, again, the best versions of ourselves and contribute to this world meaningfully. So when I think about that, I think, oh, I actually have STEM identity because I do believe I belong in this seat. I do believe I can master rigorous challenges, and I do believe that my ideas make an impact. So somewhere along the way, through my early learning, all the way through till now, I had that cultivated through mentors, through parents, through my community along the way. And so that's that was my learner self-belief, and now it's my adult self-belief, and it translates into the industry that I've chosen. So I really like to think about STEM identity as beyond the STEM acronym and really think about it from the standpoint of a learner's self-belief, right? Because we all want to belong. We all want to believe that we can master a challenge, and like that challenge doesn't define us. Like we can work through that challenge and get it to the other side, or decide, hey, that challenge is not even worth solving because it isn't really something that I can solve, and bring in others and collaborate with others to help kind of get to that solvability, or that place of solve. So, that's really what I think we as humans yearn for. And I was talking to somebody the other day, they're like, oh, so STEM identity is acquired. And I'm like, I don't know. I think babies come out with STEM identity, right? Like, I think they come out believing, oh, I belong here, right? I can master a rigorous challenge because guess what? When I cry, somebody helps me in most cases, right? I know that's not in all cases, but in most cases, I cry and somebody, right? So that was a challenge and I overcame it by making sound, right? My ideas have impact, right? Because when I smile, an adult smiles back at me, right? So that was an idea. So I don't know, it's sort of, I know that's a little heady and maybe too meta for a lot of people, but I actually believe that people, as individuals, come out with this sort of identity that they belong and that they can master rigorous challenges and their ideas have. And so therefore, because we've defined that as STEM identity, I believe people come out of the womb with STEM identity. Now, what I do believe is that they need to be cultivated. They need to have environments that cultivate that identity. They need to have people around them and systems around them that support the fact that they belong, right? We know that there's systemically that's not always the case for all individuals. And so we need to work very carefully to make sure that all humans get that inalienable right of care to thrive with their own belief that they belong here.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh my gosh. I love this so much. There's so much that I want to like tap into. I think this idea of every person just for the greater good of humanity and for their like role as a community member in the larger world. I mean, we
Mhm.
talk a lot about civic action and kind of like the
Mhm.
social studies lens in this podcast,
Yes.
but like that seems so relevant, right? Like you want to be
Yeah.
impactful, you want to be agentic, you want the sense of belonging and you want to foster it for other people. You want to be able to tackle hard things instead of just shut down when the world is like nuts, right? And
Yeah.
and I think that
Yes.
totally resonates for civics as well.
Yeah, I
So,
agree.
I mean, that's just me kind of painting my dream, but I always try to ask at the start-ish of episodes, like for guests, what I'm curious what your freedom dream is. So Dr. Bettina Love describes this as dreams grounded in the critique of injustice. And so
Mm.
you kind of alluded to like, right, like some systems and structures are not just and like what you're painting a vision of is maybe counter to what some of the systems currently are. And so you
Mhm.
maybe have already addressed this question, but I'm curious, is there anything you would add here around like the dream you hold for education?
Yeah, I think it is rooted in all students' rights to thrive and be best versions of themselves, and that sort of breaking down of the structures around them that prevent that for many youth. So my dream is to sort of figure out how to bust the structures down and to protect the youth at the center of that so that they can thrive in whatever environment they're handed, right? And so because not every student is handed the same environment for various reasons, right? Based on socioeconomic background, based on race, based on gender, based on religion. You can name all of the reasons why maybe not all students have the structures around them that support their learning. So when I think about my sort of focus is to try to figure out in a small way, right? I don't, I'm not able to solve all of the problems across the United States and world, but I do believe that in a small way, if we can sort of bubble students to be able to thrive in whatever environment they're in so that they can feel like they matter, right, and their ideas add value as we talked about earlier, and so to create an environment around them where they're almost protected from some of the structures them down so that they can stand up on their own 2 feet and look up and go, wait, I can break down that barrier. I can push through that barrier. I collectively with my peers can collaborate together to be the force that pushes against whatever is pushing against them. Right. So that I think, to layer in, that, how we as an organization have defined that STEM identity term, that's very narrow because we run a STEM company. So that's very narrow. But when I think about my own sort of seat in that as a CEO, it's bigger than that for me. It's really to make sure that the students that are in an environment that any environment of learning that they can really thrive to be best versions of themselves and see that they're better than their circumstances, and that if they themselves as individuals and they can gather collectively around them and build community, they can bust through the circumstances that are sort of pushed and forced upon them. And then, of course, my personal dream is that those that are outside of the student learning environment are also pushing from the outside in, so that the students are pushing from the outside out, inside out, we're pushing from the outside in, so that we can really crumble some of the stuff that really is disenfranchising a lot of youth from being the best versions of themselves and being able to be productive individuals and be collective in their unity for society. So
I love that dream. Thank you for sharing that.
yeah, of
I
course.
I think now about like some of the actions that educators can take, or I mean, honestly, even like family members, right? Supporting kids, like you're saying, like learning environments kind of are everywhere. We're like doing this kind of whole human wise now and in the future.
Yeah.
I think often as a teacher, I will raise my hand and say that I, for sure, when someone was like, Miss, like I'm struggling, it would be
Uh-huh.
me running over from person to person, helping. And I realize now in retrospect as a coach, that was not helpful in the moment. I wasn't
Yeah.
letting them, rise to the challenge and figuring out ways to tackle the problem themselves. Um,
Hmm.
and certainly my goal was to like alleviate their stress,
Hmm.
right, and to help, but it wasn't actually helpful. So for
Hmm.
me, this has been a mindset shift that I've gone through, but I'm curious,
Hmm.
are there other mindset shifts that you think are really required for educators to make to be able to actually cultivate this STEM identity that is
Yeah.
different from how maybe traditionally school is done?
Yeah, I'd say there's two things to that. So the first thing actually is exactly what you were saying. And I can even speak as a parent. So I have an 11-year-old daughter, and the natural instinct is always to jump in and solve or to alleviate the stress or to help. And that natural instinct is because we're trying to make sure that they are feeling safe and they're not struggling, right? And we work a lot on this, even our curriculum set for SmartLab, where we focus on teaching the facilitator how to allow productive struggle, right? And that's key because you don't want a student to struggle past the point of or where they give up or where they sort of reach their pay grade, if you will. They reach their level of capacity to like push past their amygdala firing and that fear, fight, or fight happening. So there is this sort of productive struggle zone that we really try to get facilitators to in our professional development of our facilitators in a smart lab, because that productive struggle is really, really important. Like let the student struggle enough, kind of push through and fail enough times that they can then see like, oh, I can go another place in my brain and try to get that to solve that. Or I could walk away because I'm too frustrated right now. I'm allowed to walk away and come back to it later and then pick up right where I left off. But there is that zone of productive struggle that's really important because you don't want to go past that zone, because if you go past that zone, then students actually can retreat and their amygdala, right, their fight or flight nerve fires, and then they're not productive. Right. So there's that zone of letting them struggle enough without letting them get to that fight or flight zone. And even sometimes we actually do teach, sometimes getting in that fight or flight zone is good, because sometimes when you're fighting with the answer, there's ways that, I mean, we do this in life, right? There's ways in which you need to walk away, do some breathing, get out in nature, read a book, really get out of your environment so that you can come back the better version of yourself, right? And I had this issue with my daughter last night. She was tired and she didn't want to do her 20 minutes of reading that she's supposed to do every night, and she had just come from karate, and so I could tell she was just in this like zone of past the point of I can't even figure out how to get into the bathroom and brush my own teeth, right? And she was just like, can you help me brush my teeth? And I'm thinking, you're 11, I don't need to help you brush your teeth, right? But my natural reaction was like, yes, because I need you to read and I need you to go to sleep. So I'm going to grab your toothbrush and I'm going to brush your teeth for you. Right. And as I'm doing this, because although I talk about this a lot, I fail at it often. I'm brushing her teeth and she's standing there with her arms down and her eyes closed. And I'm thinking, oh, I have just enabled her to use me essentially. Because and I could see in her eyes, like, oh, I got you, almost like, or I could see in her body language, I got you. And I know I don't think she was intentionally thinking that, but I think in her mind, she was like, oh, I was able to cry a little bit. I was able to like pretend I don't know how to brush my teeth or I can't function, right? Because I am tired, right? And so I calmly put the toothbrush down. I said, okay, Jila, I started this for you. I need you to finish and I will meet, I'm going to go do my own brushing of the teeth and washing my own face. And I will meet you in your room with my own book and we will read together. Right. But it took me that moment of doing to then also have my own moment of, wait a minute, I just got tricked here, or I just fell into a pattern of trying to help and solve because I could see my poor child was tired and da, 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 and I had to really stop. And I could see begrudgingly, she was sort of like, ah, but she picked up that toothbrush, she finished brushing her teeth, she got herself in bed, she opened her book, and she was waiting for me to come in, and she was reading by the time I got in there with my book to sit on the floor next to her to read. So that was really powerful moment for me, a small example, but a very powerful for moment for me that we can jump in, like you said, you're walking around the classroom and you can jump in, but also when we're mature enough to go, whoa, I've overstepped here, and sort of kick it off for them and then walk away. So I think sometimes I see facilitators across the country like, oh, I'm supposed to just be hands off with everything and let them sort of, and it doesn't mean as an educator, you can't guide, you can't start, you can't maybe add value in the middle of, but you have to know when to back away. You have to know when to let them push through that obstacle, right? So anyway, that was a great example of something that happened to me last night, that I had a moment of realization. And I know, despite that she was sort of angry about it, I know that, she's more than capable of the task that she was trying to do. And had I continued to help her, I would have been enabling her to lean on me too hard when things got hard for her.
I love that example of thank you. Very relatable. I think that's great. And I think that's also your idea that it's okay if you find yourself in that moment and you can then step back. It's very
Yeah.
forgiving for the people who are in
Yeah.
transition from like, I used to run to put out fires and help kids too
Yes.
much and over scaffold,
Yes.
but I can notice in the moment and remove myself. I love that like reframing of like, I kicked you off. Like I got you started. Here we go. Now it's you.
Yeah, now it's you. Yeah. Oh, and I had said there was a second thing. The second thing, and because we're a STEM organization, although I just believe this in general, putting in a hands-on approach or some sort of tool or some sort of STEM application, whether it's a hands-on, I believe STEM applications can even be paper clips. Like STEM application doesn't have to be, an AI VR glass, AR VR glasses. Like it really could be just a paper clip, right? So I believe putting in some sort of hands-on tool into a student's learning process can help open up the brain in ways that all humans need, right? That kind of going back to the root of play, right? And you play when you're young, but when you're elementary, middle, high school, and then even higher ed, and even as an adult with me, there's moments where I have to like pick up something and play with it to open up parts in my brain that can then find a solution to something, right? When you're stuck in a problem, you have to that active hands-on play. Now, in most cases, you want that active hands-on play to be connected to whatever you're trying to solve. But sometimes that active play is really just opening the brain up, right? I had this conversation. Somebody was interviewing me last night for something they were doing for their MBA program, and they were asking me sort of what were my tips and tricks. And I said, I sort of have this weird active rebellion thing that I do. And they were like, ooh, tell me more. Active rebellion. That sounds really like gritty. And I'm like, actually, it's like sometimes I just drive home a different route. Sometimes I just listen to a different radio station. Sometimes I just brush my teeth with my left hand versus my right hand. Like this active rebellion doesn't have to be so rebellion esque. It could be some small things that you're doing slightly different that open your brain up to think about new ideas, that think about ways to solve a problem in a way that maybe you hadn't thought of before. So I kind of like this active rebellion. Maybe I'll write a book about it someday, but this sort of active rebellion that's very simple acts during the course of your day to get you out of routine. And I believe in structure. I believe in routine. I believe in discipline. But you have to sometimes break those norms in order to have your brain open up for really amazing thoughts that are trapped right? And so I don't know how many times you've been in a car and driven and go, I don't even know how I got here. I have no idea how I got here. And, although if you force yourself to go a different route, then you're like, oh, wait, do I have to turn right? Do I have to turn left? Wait, where am I going? I'm in a different way. So I do that every day. I try to do this active rebellion in very small ways that spark the brain. So I can think about in a classroom setting, a teacher, an educator, try to think about maybe changing up their routine instead of walking the classroom and they normally, because teachers I know find themselves doing, I'm going to always go to this side of the room first and then go around to the left side. Go the other direction and see what happens, right? You're going to make the kids go because they also know, oh, she's going to get to me last. So by the time she gets to me, I'll show her that I'm working on something, right? But I'll be maybe doodling before she gets around to me, right? But now if the teacher's changing their walk, now you're changing that student to go, oh, I have to be actively engaged now because she's not doing her normal left to right walk or right to left walk, right? So I don't know, little things like that I think could be really helpful for a teacher. Have the student have, maybe the teacher sits on the floor one day out of nowhere, or sits on the desks, or has a kid sit on the floor, even if they're in high school. Just like change it up and do these small acts of rebellion that I think can really open up those spaces for being okay with failure, for being okay with change, for being resilient when things aren't always as you imagine them or you're used to them being.
Oh, I love this idea that you're just like opening the brain up, that like
Yeah.
that is so cool. I'm latching onto that piece. I also was thinking about you describing your guide for facilitators. And
Hmm.
so thinking about instruction and instruction design, like both the pre-planning, like I'm going to design in this particular way to help kids like have this opportunity for
Hmm.
grappling and productive struggle. But then I also like I think we focus a lot on that and I know
Hmm.
that that's super important. And this idea of like the responsive piece. Like I'm going to see what
Hmm.
kids can do and then I'm going to respond accordingly so that they're in that
Hmm.
zone you're describing. I'm
Hmm.
curious if you could share some of those tips that you have in your kind of coaching of facilitators and facilitation of how to do this. If someone's listening and they're like, I'm going to try this out today in class. Is there something that you could do differently to be more responsive?
Yeah, I think two things that pop to mind, without going into the full facilitation training that we do, but two things that I think are really simple, like you said, what could they do today, is pause before responding, pause before answering. Even a student that raises their hand and says, hey, I have a question, right? This is my question. Instead of going, well, let me answer that for you because I'm the teacher, I'm the person that knows, I'm supposed to answer this question, pausing and saying, you know what, that's a really quick question, tell me more about why you're asking that. Tell me more about what the point is of that question. Are you, do others have an idea to help that to help that? Like really putting the question back on the student. I do this at work a lot and it throws people off actually. Many times, when you're the CEO of a company, I didn't know this until I became a CEO, but people ask you the things that are like so low level that as if you're supposed to know every answer, you know, and or even high level as if you're supposed to have all the high level answers, right? And I find myself a lot going, I don't have any idea, or that's a really interesting question, or I haven't thought about that yet. I've now started to use this sort of, that's a really good question, tell me why you're asking. What do you think we would get from that by solving that, or by that solution, or that if I answered that question, if I even dare to know the answer to that question, what would you get from that? Is there a point behind your question? What do you think the answer should be? That actually makes people uncomfortable. They're like, oh, well, I asked you. Of course I don't know. But I'm like, no, I'm curious. How do you think? And then all of a sudden they're like, well, I think we should do it this way, and I think you should do it that way, and I think maybe if we tried it this way, and I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Maybe we should try that. Maybe you could own that. Maybe that's a project you want to take on, right? And that opens up this sort of pause before you just jump in and answer. So that would be my one tip for people is just pause before you answer and sort of put the question back on them, or maybe not the question back on them, but put the why they're asking back on them, because then it can force them to think about like, well, why am I asking that question? What will that serve this discussion? Is it just because it popped in my head and I'm that kid that just likes to ask questions? Or is it, I'm really curious about this and I think help me, if I understood this, it would help me understand that, and make that kid sort of think through why that question matters. And then of course, engage the rest of the class to maybe help them solve it rather than standing up being the expert in the room, right? So that's one. The other thing is this idea of when you see people struggling, actively walk away. And had I done that last night with my daughter in the toothbrush moment, I guarantee her standing in the bathroom with her arms down and the tears streaming, staring at the mirror, but like I don't know how to brush my teeth. Had I walked away from that circumstance, she would have had to regroup. She would have had to eventually pick up the toothbrush and brush her teeth because she does know how to brush her teeth, right? So had I done that rather than like, oh, I'm just going to jump in and help you grab the toothbrush and shove it in your mouth and start the process, um, she would have had to work through feelings in that moment and work through like, I do know how to do this. I'm not going to just stand here and cry all night. I need to pick up that toothbrush and brush my teeth and go into my room, right? So that would be the second sort of like quick thing. The moment you see struggle or somebody frustrated in the corner, maybe just actively walking away, keeping your eye on them to make sure they don't get past that point of like, now I'm a wreck and now I'm hiding under the table, or now I'm arguing with my peer or whatever, right? Or throwing things to the teacher. Those things can happen too. But walk away and sort of allow them to have their moment, because most humans need those moments that they can figure out how to work through. Right now, there's some right that we know that need other accommodations to help support them in their time of need. But for the most part, you can identify like, oh, I'm going to let that child struggle a little bit more, but I, as a teacher, had to actively walk away, because just like at the playground when a student fall or where a kid falls, they look for their parents' reaction. And it's the same thing as you get older, right? Your rebellion in the classroom is looking to see, is somebody noticing, is somebody seeing me, right? And sometimes walking away from that is them going, wait, I can solve this. Or a peer jumps in and goes, let me help you, right? So those would be the two things that I would recommend, that people can do out of the gate, and that we try to really make sure facilitators are strong at in a STEM learning environment.
I love those. Thank you so much for those. Those are, yeah, immediately actionable. So super, super helpful and concrete. I'm thinking back to kind of at the start where you were talking about, and I wrote this down, how do you think? Like the idea of like STEM identity and like, coaching students around this. It's important to coach like the thinking, right? And the thinking is what we want to do,
Yeah.
especially in the humanities. I think a lot of times we prioritize the way that you get the thinking out, like on a paper
Mm-hmm.
in writing, for example. And then the kid who struggles
Mm-hmm.
with writing, it's like, oh, I can't see the thinking because I'm not thinking
Mm-hmm.
about the various ways that the thinking can come out. But it really
Mm-hmm.
is about the thinking that we want to
Mm-hmm.
cultivate. And I'm also thinking about kind of your definition of STEM identity and thinking about that belonging, the rigorous challenge. And then the third one, I can't read my own
My
hand.
ideas have an impact. My
Thank
ideas
you.
have an impact. Yeah.
Ideas have an impact. Is there like an aspect of those pieces that you find that teachers have the most kind of challenge with, or is there kind of a particular struggle that people face in cultivating that STEM identity and kind of focusing on the thinking? And then how do you like coach through a challenge like that? I imagine it's not super easy to make that transition for teachers.
Hi, this is Leah popping in to share the free resource for this episode, Lindsay's Culture Playlist. You can find it at the blog post for this episode, www.lindsaybethlyons.com/blog/249. Now, back to the show.
Yeah, so SmartLab really focuses on an integrated ecosystem. So, our tagline is, we're an integrated ecosystem that sparks aha moments that and builds STEM identity for learners. That's sort of our tagline, right? And we think of aha moments as that sort of sudden realization that learners have when they connect ideas in new and meaningful ways. Right. So that's how we define an aha moment. And if you have multiple aha moments, that's what's building your STEM identity. If you have multiple aha moments, you're starting to get that self-belief, that learner self-belief that you belong, can master rigorous challenges, and your ideas add value. So this idea of what is the hardest part of getting students their STEM identity is really allowing for multiple aha moments to happen. And so when we talk about the integrated ecosystem, the environment matters, right? At SmartLab, we help classrooms, school districts, schools themselves customize their learning environment to make sure their learning environment is conducive for hands-on project-based learning, because not all learning environments are. And you can customize a corner of a library to do that, or you can customize a room that you can lock and call it your STEM lab, right? So no matter where, or even in the classroom, a corner of a classroom, you can create a customized environment that is conducive for hands-on project-based learning. So at SmartLab, we help schools do that. But a teacher themselves in a classroom can create an environment in their classroom that is conducive for hands-on project-based learning. And that's being really intentional about what that learning environment looks like. Is there collaborative spaces? Is there room for active play? Is there room for movement, right? Is there room for bringing in a STEM application to sort of use to facilitate learning, right? So that sort of customized learning environment is really key in this ecosystem, right? But as we both know, ecosystems are only as good as everything that's in them, not just the environment, because otherwise that environment could just be a storage unit, right? So you want a customized learning environment that optimizes for learning, but then you also need the curriculum that is designed to optimize learning, right? And so in our case, we design our curriculum all based on state standards and align, but really what we do in our curriculum is take STEM applications that students can use in a hands-on project-based way and connect them to real-world challenges as well as industry pathways. So that way there isn't just oh, I know how to use a 3D pen, but it's, oh, I've used a 3D pen, but let me tell you about the use case for that, right? Again, I'm going to do a great example. I had a group of 5 fifth graders in my car the other day, and we have brought SmartLab to my daughter's elementary school. It's a public elementary school in San Diego, and we have brought SmartLab there. And the foundation actually was so invested in getting STEM. It's an IB school, but they were so invested in getting STEM into this public school that the foundation use their jogathon money and all of the donation money to put the Smart Lab in the school. So I had these 5 fifth graders in my car, right, where I'm taking them to their dance class, their dance team class. And I asked them, hey, how was Smart Lab this week? And they were like, oh my gosh, did you know we did the shadows in motion unit? Did you know that in a field, the opposing team makes sure that the home team makes sure that the opposing team sits with the sun in their eyes. And so when the shadow comes over the stadium, that the opposing team has the sun in their eyes. Did you know this, mommy? And I'm like, oh, wow, yeah, that's amazing. This is cool. And all of them are rattling around like, yeah, and then this use it for a shadow and this use for a shadow. And I was like, well, what STEM application, what we're using? They're like, oh, we were using a 3D pen. And I'm like, oh, so they weren't talking about the thing that's really cool and exciting. They were actually talking about the use case for it, right? They were designing something with their 3D pen for the shadows in motion type activity that applied to something in real world. So they were actually more excited about the real world application. So that curriculum and how you use the hands-on tools and equipment is so important, and can be where facilitators fail when they're admiring the 3D pen and they're really excited about the CNC machine, or they're really excited about teaching kids how to use a 3D printer, and so they're really excited about that, opposed to how do you connect that thing to a real world problem? How do you connect that thing to learning that really gets the student to think about a real world industry or some sort of problem that can be solved through this use of this STEM tool? So that could be an area that people really need to think about, because many times I see random acts of STEM happening in school districts, right? Meaning the kids are getting to play with this stuff and they're very excited about this stuff, but there's no connection to anything. It's sort of like, okay, but what is the connection to that thing that you got to play with that now applies in real world, right? And now you and I know this AI powered world we living in, eventually AI is going to do all of those STEM applications. It already does most of them, but it's going to use those, already going to be able to do those STEM applications. So we want students to be able to know how they work, maybe play with how they work so that they can actually have that hands-on tools, but also more importantly, how it applies in real world. So that when they get to the real world, they know when to bring in that AI tool to do that thing, because they know what it's used for, right? So they can lead in an AI powered world opposed to AI leading them. So that would be part of it. And then, so yeah, so the environment's important, the curriculum and the hands-on tools and equipment is important. We've already had talked about how important the facilitator is, right? And we certify our facilitators so that if it's a librarian that's becoming the STEM teacher, or if it's a that lead math instructor at the school becoming the STEM, or the science person that's becoming it, or they put a paraprofessional in that becomes a STEM facilitator, that we make sure that we set them up for success so that they can understand the curriculum, understand the kits and equipment, understand the STEM applications, but more importantly, understand how to allow students to have a productive struggle while they're learning, right? And then lastly, it's really the support and partnership, right? This idea, when we think about our ecosystem, it's these 5 things, and the support and partnership is really key. Now, support could be everything from, at SmartLab, we have customer success people and we have tech support people, like that's all support. But really, I like to overemphasize, whether you're in a SmartLab or you're just in a classroom trying to do this, or you already have a STEM lab in another, is that you figure out how to bring the community into your environment, right? Even if it's in the humanities class, even if it's in the social studies class, even if it's in, a STEM learning environment, to have the community come in so that students can see themselves, right? So they have representation, they see themselves in careers of the future. They can hear from potential mentors that maybe aren't their parents or aren't people that they get to see every day. And that the facilitator or the adult that's coming into this environment to share their own experiences gives reasons to believe that you don't have to have the highest scores all the time. You don't have to always go to the best schools. I always have to look a certain way to be successful in this world. So bringing the community in so that students have a variety of people that they get to see themselves in, I think can be really, really supportive to that optimized learning for kids' future growth. So I sort of roundabout answered your question about like, what is it that facilitates struggle with the most. And I think it's sort of making sure that all of the pieces are integrated together to optimize the learning, right? They focus on maybe one aspect of the learning environment or one aspect of the kits and equipment, or to your point, focus too much on the designing of the curriculum, right? Instead of like, how do I make sure the ecosystem is optimized? Is the learning environment strong? Is the curriculum developed, in a way that's going to optimize learning? Is the way in which I facilitate that at peak capacity? Am I bringing the community in to give real world examples and to give mentorship to these students? So really making sure that you're thinking of the whole ecosystem, I think, is where people struggle the most, because they get overly fixated on one aspect or another.
Love the ecosystem frame. Love the components. Those are so good. Thank you for sharing that. And I think as a final question that I'm going to sneak in as we close here, where can folks learn more about you or connect with you or SmartLab online or otherwise?
Yeah. So I hope people go to our website, and that's smartlablearning.com. So SmartLab Learning, spelled as you would expect.com. They can go there. There's a ton of free resources. We actually, on November 7th, have a what we're calling STEM Identity Day. So there is National STEM Identity, or National STEM Day, that is on November 8th, but it's a Saturday. So we wanted to make sure schools got to participate. So we're calling it STEM Identity Day in support of National STEM Day. And we're inviting the community into schools, and we can help facilitate that so that it's all, everybody's credentialed and has their visitor passes and knows what to do. But we're inviting community into schools, not just smart labs, but schools. Any school, doesn't have to be a smart lab, any school, to come in and share their STEM identity story. So to take our definition and say, oh, where do I think I gained my own STEM identity along my journey, and be able to share that with students. And then for them to think about, like, what STEM applications do I use in my job, and be able to share that with students as well. So that's on November 7th. So please have, if you're interested, go to our website and learn about STEM Identity Day, and come volunteer your time at school districts across the country so you can share your own STEM identity journey with students, so that we're really starting to make this movement a thing across for all students, as we talked about earlier. So that's one way. And then, of course, there's tons of other tools and resources on the website for people to look at. And if you're like, oh, I don't have students, but I want to participate in this, we can help you, match you with the school, so you could donate money to the school or donate money to the foundation of that school, so that they could put, either a smart lab or some sort of STEM learning environment into the hands of that school. So we can match match people that are interested in donating to schools and to STEM identity for students up with school districts in their community or across the country, so we can help people do that. And also, we just really hope that people engage in this conversation and know that, we want smart labbers to know, but we really want all students to know that they belong here, they can do this, they add value, and really they're future ready. So that really is important to us. People can also look me up on LinkedIn, Dr. Jennifer Berry. I'm happy to talk to anybody, happy to mentor, happy to engage in conversation. I'm always here for people because that's how I learn best.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Berry. And we'll link to all that stuff in the show notes and the blog post for this episode as well. It has been an absolute pleasure talking to you today. Thank you for sharing your wisdom.
Thank you. You're amazing. I'm so happy you're doing this. And you told me earlier you've been doing this for 5 years. What an impressive. I can't wait to follow you and start listening to all your episodes.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
If you like this episode, I bet you'll be just as jazzed as I am about my coaching program for increasing student-led discussions in your school. Shane Safir and Jamila Dugan talk about a pedagogy of student voice in their book, Street Data. They say students should be talking for 75% of class time. Do students in your school talk for 75% of each class period? I would love for you to walk into any classroom in your community and see this in action. If you're smiling to yourself as you listen right now, grab 20 minutes on my calendar to brainstorm how I can help you make this big dream a reality. I'll help you build a comprehensive plan from full-day trainings and discussion protocols like Circle and Socratic Seminar to follow-up classroom visits where I can plan, witness, and debrief discussion-based lessons with your teachers. Sign up for a nerdy, no-strings-attached brainstorm call at lindsaybethlyons.com/contact. Until next time, leaders, think big, act brave, and be your best self.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. Explore more podcasts at www.teachbetterpodcastnetwork.com. We'll see you on the next episode.